Welcome to the Prophecy Club. Our topic today is USA earthquake if we split Israel and Israel-Gaza war. Now, let me just say something before we start. You know, Prophecy Club brings you a lot of different prophecies, but in my opinion, the one and the single most important prophecy, I'm not talking about the ones in the Bible, I'm talking about the ones that he's given outside the Bible, in my opinion, is the one given to Dimitri Duduman that says the fall of America will start with an internal revolution in America started by the communists. Period. That's the biggest one. Because that's the one that is telling America she's about to fall. And I do not know, I do not know how long it's going to be from the time that internal revolution starts until the Russian bombs actually hit. I'd like to think it's a long time, like maybe 5 or 6, 7 years, but that's being hopeful. But there's a lot of things that are designed to weaken our nation. And today we're examining several of those. This is really important. And I really encourage you, to send this out to your friends. This is really, really important stuff. Okay, so U.S. earthquake if we split Israel. So let's cover some of the things that it's going to be entailing. All right, so we're also going to be covering red heifers, how the red heifers causes the sacrifice to begin. Jews will have temple access and Jerusalem split. These are some of the biggest prophecies in the last 2,000 years. Okay, let's talk about Israel-Gaza war and how it leads to a Jerusalem split. Let me remind you, Genesis 12:3 says, I will bless them that bless you, curse them that curse you, so we don't ever turn against Israel. Even though they do bad things, just like we do bad things, we still stand with Israel. And in case you want to know the land of Israel, here it is. Genesis 15:18, remember that. Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river of Euphrates, meaning this is the land that God gave to Israel. So, if and when anybody asks me, well, Stan, what do you think they ought to do with all those Palestinians? I think they need to say, Palestinians, hit the road. That's our land. All of this in the yellow is Israel's land. And I believe, according to Ezekiel 38:8, I believe it's all going to be returned to Israel because Ezekiel 38:8 says that Israel is dwelling safely, all of them, when Armageddon happens. Well, that's not happening now, and that means that Israel, i.e. God, removes all of her enemies from around her, and that would describe that land right there. So look at that, because that's biblical, and that's coming probably in our lifetime. I want to take a second and cover these, because in my opinion, having thought this through and prayed this through, these are some of the most important prophecies too. So number 2, Israel will give the Palestinians a state. I think what is going to happen at the conclusion of this Israel-Gaza war right now, what is going to conclude is America is going to twist Israel's arm, make them give the Palestinians a state, because Israel sees that they don't have a military strong enough to defeat all their enemies yet. But they will one of these days, and consequently, they're going to have to give the Palestinians a state. Now, this was back in 2002. So that's 22 years ago. Leslie was given this. Then in 2006, she was given these newspaper headlines. I believe that there's a high probability, I'm going to say 99%, that we're going to see Omar ushers in Palestinian state on some newspaper this year. And because of this dream, which I'm not covering all of it in detail, my suspicion is Omar ushers in Palestinian state will actually appear on the Jerusalem Post. That's my guess. It's a good guess, though. Then the next headline, probably the next day, probably within a week or so, the next headline will be Catastrophe Hits America. If God does what he's done in the past, according to John McTernan's book, right here, you can get it if you'd like it. This one gives you example after example after example after example. When America hits Israel, God hits America. generally the next day. When America does something to hurt Israel or kick out Jews out of their homes, this book will give you evidence that says the very next day, God kicks the same number of people out of their American homes. Just as Chris Reed was told, as Israel goes, so goes America. So if we want America to do well, America, you best be blessing the Jews in Israel. Now let me say something else. Not all of the Jews, according to Revelation, are Jews. Some of those are actually Khazarians. They're actually Moloch worshippers, okay? I mean, just like in the days of Moses, he had a problem with the Moloch worshippers. When he came down off the Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, he broke them when he saw them worshiping the golden calf, and that's Moloch. Okay, that's the biggest problem. Now, let me go on. Catastrophe hits America. My guess is we're going to see a giant earthquake at the New Madrid Fault, say the prophecies. Now, Leslie was not told where, but others have said New Madrid Fault right up the center of the country. And then the next headline would be one of America's greatest times of need. Israel refuses help to America. Probably. I said probably. I didn't say for sure. Probably. Those 4 newspaper headlines will be seen this year, 2024. I think the other 3s are yet, well, hopefully, coming several years later. Why do I say that? Because the oil makes the Jews willing to fight for the land. The oil also gives them the money to strengthen their military. Well, massive amounts of oil hadn't been found in Israel yet, and even if they were found today, it would still take Israel several years to build up their military, unless they can do it faster than what I know of. So that would mean that probably this is a few years down the road, hopefully 10 years down the road. Okay, now let's go on. Israel-Gaza war leads to Jerusalem split. Now let's talk about that. New headline. Netanyahu vows total victory to IDF soldiers. Good for you, Netanyahu. And I hear a lot of people say bad things about him. I don't know if he's a good guy or not. I don't know. But he's a Jew, as far as I know, and so I'm going to support him. We've been doing this successfully for 5 months already. This is the record time in the history for Israel's wars. He said, I'll continue to reject the pressure that Israel is receiving from America and the other nations around it. I'll continue to reject the pressure. We will enter Rafah. That's huge. Well, if he calls me, I'm going to say, don't stop until you kick them all out. They're on your property, and they have throughout the Old Testament, you go and read that, the Philistines, David and Goliath, all of that. This is where the land that they lived on. Okay, so kick them all out. They're on your land, according to the Bible. We will complete the elimination of Hamas battalions. Good for you. We will restore security, and we will bring total victory for the people of Israel and the state of Israel. Good for you. Next headline. Full text of Senator Chuck Schumer's speech. Israeli elections are the only way. So he's a Jew, but he might be of the house of Moloch. In other words, those, Revelation says, they say they're Jews, but they're not, but they're the synagogue of Satan. As a democracy, Israel has the right to choose its own leaders, he says. This is word for word from his talk. And we should let the chips fall where they may, but the important thing is that Israelis are given a choice. Speak your own words, okay? There needs to be a fresh debate about the future of Israel after October 7th. In my opinion, he says, that is the best accomplished by holding an election. Can you imagine if Mexico were to jump up and say, you know what, you guys in America need to hold an election? Can you imagine if America were to jump up and tell Canada they need to hold an election? Or if, say, Russia were to say to Ukraine, you need to hold an election. What business is it, what place is it for us to tell Israel they need to hold an election? But that's exactly what they're doing. If Prime Minister Netanyahu's current coalition remains in power after the war begins to wind down and continues to pursue dangerous and inflammatory policies, okay, Schumer, we don't need your opinion. Israel is going to do, hopefully, what God tells them to do, not what Chuck Schumer tells them to do. The United States will have no choice but to play a more active role. What's that mean? I know what that means. It's saying we're going to twist the arm of Israel. We are going to tell Israel what they're going to do. Oh, no, you don't. God does, hopefully. The United States will have no choice but to play a more active role in shaping Israel policy by using our leverage to change the present course. They are openly saying, we think we need to twist Israel's arm to give the Palestinians a state, because Palestinians are, in my opinion, more of the devil than the Jews. Let's go on. On the Israeli side, the U.S. government should demand that the Israeli conduct itself with a future two-state solution. Remember, we have 12, or is it 14 prophecies that say that if America splits Israel, God will split America. We should not be forced into a position of unequivocally supporting the actions of an Israeli government that includes bigots. So this is Shumer calling the leadership in Israel bigots. Now, what's a bigot? A bigot is one that thinks they're right 100% of the time and that they cannot be wrong on anything when it comes to religious matters. Includes bigots who reject the idea of a Palestinian state. Yes, it's God's land. And if you go into Isaiah, it's Joel 3:2, says that they parted my land. So it's actually God's land. And Chuck Shumer and a bunch of other people around behind him want to come in and split that land, and it's going to destroy America when they do. Israel is a democracy. Actually, we're not a democracy. We are a republic. But they keep calling us a democracy, trying to get us to think we're a democracy. Now, what's a democracy? A democracy is mob rule. In other words, whatever the people vote for, they get. We're not a democracy. For the republic for which he stands. Remember that in the oath? We're a republic. Means that we live according to a set of laws, the Constitution. And hopefully Israel is the same thing, but they keep calling us democracies. 5 months into this conflict, it is clear that Israelis need to take stock of the situation and ask, must we change course? Schumer is basically telling Israel, you got to give the Palestinians a state. Well, that erases much of the question. So is America forcing Israel to give the Palestinians a state? You better know she is. So when the Palestinian state is given, and there's a big earthquake up the New Madrid Fault, kills thousands, who knows, maybe millions of Americans, can't anybody say we weren't warned? Can't anybody say we didn't deserve it, according to the eyes of God? At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel at a time when so many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of the government. Chuck, take a hike. And when we want your opinion, we'll call you. If I was leading Israel, that's what I'd say. But now the problem is, Israel can't say that. They got to be nice to America because America is the one that sends them all of their munitions, gives them lots of money, and is their big brother. And the one primarily, if America wasn't there, there wouldn't be an Israel. But there's about to not be America because God is going to step in to protect and provide for Israel. You watch. I also believe that, this is still Chuck Shumer saying, I also believe a majority of the Israeli public will recognize the need for change, and I believe that holding a new election once the war starts to wind down would give Israel an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future. Again, Chuck, we don't need your opinion. We won't need you telling us what to do. Again, if I was Netanyahu. Of course, the United States cannot dictate the outcome of an election, nor should we try. That's exactly what he's trying to do. That is for the Israeli public to decide, a public that I believe understands better than anybody that Israel cannot hope to succeed as a pariah opposed by the rest of the world. And I'm going to say, yes, they can, and they will. Israel doesn't need America. America needs Israel. As a democracy, Israel has the right to choose its own leaders. It's not a democracy, it's a republic. And we should let the chips fall where they may. But the important thing is that Israelis are given a choice. There needs to be a fresh debate about the future of Israel after October 7th. In other words, we want you to give the Palestinians a state. That's exactly what he's saying. Then, Shumer continues saying, in my opinion, that is best accomplished by holding an election. Well, Chuck, sit down, shut up. Israel doesn't care about your opinion. Unfortunately, they have to. because they aren't strong enough to defeat all their enemies yet. Heavy on the word yet. That is, not until they get oil and they strengthen their military, which is coming. If Prime Minister Netanyahu's current coalition remains in power, after the war begins to wind down and continues to pursue dangerous and inflammatory, well, it's only inflammatory to the left, those people that hate Israel like you. Again, this is Shumer talking. Dangerous and inflammatory policies that test existing U.S. standards for assistance. Then the United States will have no choice but to play a more active role in shaping Israel policy by using our leverage to change the present course. Okay, that's what you call twisting Israel's arm. Remember, it's either 12 or 14 prophecies we have that says that if America forces Israel to split Jerusalem, split Israel, then God will split America. This is really big. So sometimes the devil causes us to do wrong things, and then God destroys us. And that's exactly what's happening here. The United States bond with Israel is unbreakable. Yeah, well, not according to prophecies. I could show you some prophecies that specifically say that we turn against Israel. But if extremists continue unduly influence Israeli policy, then the administration should use the tools at its disposal to make sure our support for Israel is aligned with our more broader goal of achieving long-term peace and stability in the region. In other words, destroying Israel and putting Antichrist, their man, on the throne. That's their real objective. I believe this would make a lasting two-state solution more likely. Okay, well, God doesn't want a two-state solution. He doesn't want his land split. He's put that pressure on Israel for a reason, because he wants Israel to turn from their other gods, to turn from their foolishness, and start receiving Jesus. But for a two-state solution to work over the long term, it has to include real and meaningful compromises by both sides. Well, first of all, we don't want a two-state solution, Chuck. For example, too many Israelis who say they want a two-state solution don't acknowledge how the amount and extent of expanding settlements render that a virtual impossibility. Well, again, their land, I showed you, I'll jump over here again. I'll show you, so I can come back to this again real quick here. This is the land that God has given to Israel. And I'm giving you the scripture on it. So, let's go on. And too many Palestinians who say they want a two-state solution don't acknowledge how their insistence on an unequivocal right of return is a fatal impediment to progress. Both ways of thinking are impeding the peace process. No, here's the way the peace process works. Israel turns to Jesus. Not everybody, of course. Not everybody. They won't all, ever. But a lot of them could turn away from other gods. And if you read Jeremiah 50, verse 20, it says, "And the sins of Israel were sought for, and there were none. And the sins of Judah were sought for, and none were found, for I will pardon them whom I reserve." So there is a time coming when they don't necessarily receive Jesus. They don't necessarily repent. There's not a massive revival in Israel. God just forgives them. Why would he do that? Well, because they've been through 2,000 years of punishment. That's why. In other words, you might say they served their sentence and now they're being set free. So consequently, no, we don't need to split Israel. No, God doesn't need to split Israel to bring peace, and America needs to just continue to support Israel and keep their as we say in Texas, their cotton-picking paws out of it. And there are others on the left who view a two-state solution with skepticism as an ideal that will never happen, and it shouldn't happen, a far-off goal that allows for the continuation of the status quo in Gaza and the West Bank, where Palestinians face unique obstacles compared to their Israeli counterparts. As a result, they reject a two-state solution in favor of one state, where Palestinians and Israelis would supposedly live in democratic peace side by side. Look, Christians, or those people that follow Jesus, will never live side by side by those that follow Allah. It ain't gonna happen. One side kills the other. I can understand the idealism that inspires so many young people in particular to support a one-state solution. Why can't we all live side by side, house by house, in peace? Because that's not the way it'll happen. Either they're all Christians or they're all Muslims, but Christians, Muslims, or Jews and Muslims won't ever live peacefully side by side. Okay, so now let's talk about red heifers, sacrifice beginning, and Jews and temple access to Jerusalem split. Because what you're looking at is actually there's 5 red heifers that were sent over from Texas about a year ago. 4 of them are still qualified to be the sacrifice. Now, why is this important? Because it's almost been 2,000 years since Israel has sacrificed animals. And Daniel 9:27 says, "For he shall this is what starts the tribulation, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week," means in the middle of the 7-year period, "he will cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease," speaking of the Antichrist. Well, they got to start animal sacrifice in Israel before the Antichrist can sit on the throne and stop animal sacrifice. So in that there has not been animal sacrifice in Israel for almost 2,000 years, and here it is probably going to start this year. They are saying, well, here, let me read it. Israel's TV channel 12 News released an investigative report about 5 red heifers that were brought to the Jewish state last September in supposed funneling of government funds to construct the third temple. In other words, Jews, they're ready to go, okay? In the study, he says that 1 red heifer would provide enough ashes to purify 660 billion purifications. Well, at least it wasn't 666 billion purifications. Anyway, he says that the government has shifted funds and that many rabbis have forbidden their followers from coming up to the Temple Mount because they're not in a state of ritual purity. But when they sacrifice, here, let me explain how this thing works. Okay, so back in, I think it's Numbers 19, Moses was told to take a red heifer outside the city. There's a picture of Jesus. Okay, it was sacrificed outside the city. And they were to throw in hyssop, and I think it was scarlet, several things in, and they were to burn the heifer completely. And then they put the ashes into a thing they call a kalal, which is kind of a container about this big, and it's made of the dung of the animal. And then they take a straw, and they stick the straw down in the ashes of the heifer, and they sprinkle it over these big vats of water. Very, very small amount of the ashes is all it takes. Spread it over these vats of water. Remember the water that was turned into wine? Well, that was the water that was turned into wine. So then they take hyssop, which is a weed that grows wild in Israel, and you just dip this, or they dip this hyssop into the vats of purification, and then sprinkle it on the Sanhedrin, on the sacrifice, on the temple, everything that has to be ritually pure, and that allows them to sacrifice animals. And for the first time, according to their No Jesus policy, that would be the first time Jews had had their sins forgiven, both personally and also as a nation, in almost 2,000 years since Jerusalem was sacked in 70 AD. So in that this is going to happen in our lifetime, that's big. In that this is, they're planning, I'll read it, planning on doing it this year, that is huge. Let's go on. He argues that the funds are being shifted to raise tensions internationally with the Arab population. In other words, they say that that's the reason the Arabs attacked on October 7th, because they're afraid that the red heifers are going to allow Jews to start animal sacrifice, and then they believe that that is going to cause the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that upsets the Arabs. Now, I don't think that's what it was, but let's keep going. Just 2 weeks ago, on either side of the biblical Shiloh, where the tabernacle was kept during the time of the judges, a group of Jews descended from the tribe of Levi and the priestly families enacted a practice run of the purification ceremony. The event occurred at a site called Ancient Shiloh, affiliated with the Temple Institute, and contained explanations of the priestly functions, including sacrifice. The event also featured a temple banquet containing foods from the Second Temple and biblical periods. The highlight of the event was the presentation of one of the 5 red heifers. We're yearning for the temple, and suddenly there's a red heifer here, and we understand what that means. Okay, that's another thing. There's not been a red heifer available to Israel in also almost 2,000 years. There's always some kind of a white hair or some kind of a blemish they can't use that red heifer. So in that they now have 4 red heifers ready to go. That's big. We're yearning for the temple, and suddenly here's a red heifer. According to the book of Numbers, the tabernacle and the temple were purified with the ashes of a red heifer. The Torah commands that red heifer would be without spot or blemish, like Jesus was, and never have worn a yoke. Rabbinic law gives several additional stipulations to the requirements of the red heifer or calf, such as being at least 2 years of age and having no white hairs. The oldest of the red heifers brought from Texas last year is just months away from being required age to sacrifice the ritual purification ritual. What does that mean? It means that Omer ushers in Palestinian state, that if Omer is talking about the counting of the Omer, which is the 49 days between first fruits and Pentecost, and this year that is April 25th through June 13th, that means there's a high probability that we're about to see animal sacrifice start in Israel. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Antichrist is going to pop up this year, but it does mean that here in the next few years, we're probably going to see the Antichrist go in and sit on the Ark of the Covenant. And that's another thing. The Ark of the Covenant hasn't been found. It's found back in 1982 by Ron White, in my opinion. And they can bring it out at any time now. And let me skip that, or we won't get through where we're going today. Let me continue. On the Hamas-owned Al-Aqsa program, said the heifers were proof that the Israeli government has a plan to cause a religious war in the region, and the settlers state religious claims regarding the Jews' right to Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Palestinian News Network also ran a story last week accusing the Israeli government of plotting with settlers to reconstruct the Third Temple and storm the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so that's the reason that October 7th happened, the Arabs claim. Now, Ken Klein claims the Al-Aqsa Mosque does not have to be moved or destroyed. The Wailing Wall is not where the real temple is located, meaning they can start animal sacrifice and they don't have to do anything to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But truth and what they really do might be 2 different things. So here's what we need to be watching for. These 7 newspaper headlines. Omer ushers in Palestinian state is highly possible to happen this year, possibly before June 13th. And then within a day or 2 or 3, shortly after that, we'll probably see catastrophe hits America as the New Madrid earthquake hits. One of America's greatest times of need would be following right after that, and then Israel refuses help to America. There's a high probability we're about to see those 4 newspaper headlines this year. And remember, the Lord told me, Stan, when those prophecies I gave your wife begin to come to pass, people from all directions will begin to turn and listen to your ministry. That may very well happen this year. And I think that it's going to happen. Question is whether it's going to happen this year. So I would recommend you ask Jesus in your heart and get yourself prepared for the chaos that is coming. Let me talk about our 3 sponsors briefly. First, if you want to get gold or silver, we're going to send you to 800-200-GOLD or prophecyclubgold.com. prophecyclubgold.com. Second, if you want to get long-term emergency food, the only place I would send you to is josephskitchen.com. It is what I believe is God's long-term storage food. As you recall, Pharaoh and Joseph, what fed the world for 7 years was wheat. Most of your long-term storage places, $9,000 to $10,000 to feed one person for 1 year. Joseph's Kitchen can show you how to do it for about $1,000, one person, 1 year. And EMP Shield. If you want your car to start, if you want your computers to start after some kind of nuclear event, that's the device to get. And if you go to empshield.com and use the promo code PROPHECY, get your $50 discount and help your Prophecy Club.